Hey YouTube, Kevin Cleary here with a knife video for you. Today I have a very cool knife. This is the new for 2016, in fact a mid-year release from Cold Steel, the Prolite. Now this is a budget offering from Cold Steel, and this is something that a lot of companies often try to do or make a point of doing, and that is to have some knives that are in that lower price point. And I think there's a few good reasons for this. Let me know in the comments below what your sort of favorite budget branches. You know, maybe it's a Kershaw versus ZT, or maybe it's, you know, CRKT with their Drifter and M16s and stuff like that that are fairly affordable. Maybe you've got some other favorite budget brand or favorite budget division, you know, is the Bird series from Spyderco. In this case, we have the Prolite. There's a few other budget Cold Steels. The Finn Wolf was last year, but I'd love to hear that from you guys below, and let me know if you think this is sound reasoning. Okay, I think a lot of companies do this because, you know, people are going to watch reviews like this, they're going to read things, they're going to see things on maybe blade forums, they're going to go, hey, you know, I'd like a Cold Steel knife, but man, $100. You know, that Ultimate Hunter looks really cool, but it's just a little too much for me. Or that American Lawman looks like a great knife, but I just can't bring myself to spend the $90 or whatever these are going for these days. All right, so they put out something like this that serves as sort of an introductory offering. And I will say this, when companies do this, they've got to do a good job. This knife has to be good, because someone who buys this as their first Cold Steel, thinking, I'll try this one out and see if I like it, if it's crap, they're never going to go up to the Talwar or the Recon 1 or something else, okay? And I don't think this knife is crap at all. I think it's a pretty good budget offering. But let me know what your favorite sort of budget line of knives happens to be. Now, let's go into the rest of what I want to say here. I do have a little bit of a warning. I've got a cut test included in this video, and it's going to be right after we get to size and weight, but before we do sort of the tabletop top-down version or view on this knife. And the reason for that is this steel is a bit of an unknown to a lot of people, myself included. So what I did was I got this knife and I got a Spyderco Tenacious. We're mostly familiar with this knife and how it performs. And I went ahead and did a bunch of cardboard cutting to see how long these knives stay very sharp, okay? Now they were still at the end of the cut test, they were still serviceably sharp. They were still useful tools, but they had lost that very razor sharp edge. So that's gonna be rolling in here in a second, right after size and weight. And just let me know, if you're watching, let me know what you think. What's gonna do better, the Spyderco Tenacious or the Cold Steel Prolite with that 4116 steel, German steel? All right. Let's get into size and weight now before we move on to that. This knife is 7 7/8 overall, so not quite 8 inches, although I think the box may say 8 inches. These are all my own measurements. The blade length is 3 1/4 inches. Again, not 3 1/2 inches, which is definitely on the box. The closed length here is almost 4 3/4, so 4 11/16, and a very comfortable in pocket. Very lightweight, 3.2 ounces. So this is actually a pretty good offering that way. It's very lightweight. You are getting the strength of that triad lock. And let's go ahead now and see what you're getting for blade steel with that German 4116 steel. Now, if you don't want to watch the whole cut test, I'll put down below here in a comment that says how far you need to skip ahead to get to the rest of the review. Okay, thanks guys, and we'll see you in a second. Okay guys, we're going to do a little bit of an edge retention test here. There is the Cold Steel Prolite. You can see very sharp, cuts phone book paper quite well. Okay. And if I switch over here, there's the Tenacious, and again, cuts very well. One more cut with the Prolite. Okay, so both of these are about the same initial sharpness. I'm going to make a series of cuts into this cardboard, and then I'll switch. And about every 5 cuts or so, we'll do a sharpness test, unless I can start to feel the knife getting dull. Okay, so there's 10 cuts with the Prolite. And see if it still cuts phone book paper very well. Yes, it does. It still cuts phone book paper pretty nicely. That was my own mistake. Switching to the Tenacious now. And I'm actually meaning to stop just above the table. 2, 3, 4. There's 10 cuts. Okay, both these are still hair shaving sharp, phone book slicing quite easily. Switch back and do 10 more cuts. I'm going to try to move these a little closer together so I can save. So there's 10 cuts with the Prolite. Still shaves phone book paper pretty well. Still shaves hair, maybe not quite as well as it did. It's not cutting quite as well now. Still cuts. There's 10 cuts. Doesn't cut this as well as it did. Still shaves hair. Try this one more time. Yeah, still. Moving on. So there's 10 more cuts. It still feels very sharp. Still shaves hair, but not as easily as it did. We'll still cut phone book paper. So now we've done 30 cuts with each of these. See, it's nice, still cutting phone book paper pretty well. See if I can cut off some of these. There we go. Still shaves hair, that's 30 cuts. Need a new piece of phone book paper. Okay, so there's 40 cuts with the Prolite, and I think we're starting to lose a little bit of edge just from the feel of that paper. It will still cut phone book paper if I'm careful with it. Will still shave hair if I kind of work at it. So now that's tenacious, this will bring it up to 40 cuts. There's 10 cuts. Still shave hair. Still phone book paper. So 40 cuts. Now let's go to 50. Okay, so there's 50 cuts. Still cut phone book paper, just not as nicely. And it still shaves hair, but not well, okay? Let's move over here, get to 50 cuts with some inches. Yeah, it's really hanging up there now. Will still shave hair. Now I'm a little bit sweaty, which means okay, it's 50 on each. 12, so now we're at 62 cuts. It's hanging up pretty badly there now. Okay, so let's bring the tenacious up to the same number, but I think we're nearly at an end here. So 70 cuts, new foam book paper. We'll still cut it, but with difficulty. Let's switch over to the tenacious here and see how we do it. Okay, so there you go, guys. That's the difference between the German 4116 steel in the Cold Steel Prolite and the HCR 13 MOV in the Spyderco Tenacious. You can see fairly similar performance out of those, which is actually pretty good, especially when you consider the price point on these two blades. So I may do a more formal comparison on these. For now though, I just wanted to test the steel and kind of give you a sense for what kind of performance you can expect out of the steel on that Prolite, since it's an unknown to many people, myself included. There you go, and we'll get back to the rest of the review. Okay guys, so you've just seen that cut test and you've seen that this blade performed what I think was reasonably well, at least as well as the HCR 13 MOV in the Tenacious. And so that tells you you've got a reasonably good budget steel, okay? And you saw, you know, I don't know, 70 cuts or something like that. So for most of us, we're not going to be making 70 cuts through cardboard with our EDC, which means you're going to get, you know, a few days of use out of this before you need to sharpen it. All right, so that's pretty passable as far as blade steel. Yeah, it's not going to perform like M390 or S30V or something like that, but it's fine. More than sufficient for probably 85% of our everyday use tasks. All right, I did say that I cut some carpet up with this probably before, and you know, that will dull on a blade pretty quick, and this one held up okay. All right, so that's the blade steel there, performed admirably well, especially, you know, it's kind of an unknown, the 4116 German steel. And so, yeah, what we established is that it's kind of a reasonably good budget steel. What about the rest of the blade? So it's a Tanto style blade. It drops fairly significantly. So you kind of lose. Imagine if this blade went a little straighter, the way we're almost a little more used to with Tanto blades. You can imagine that you get a little more edge here on this sort of past that secondary tip. Not the end of the world. Still a very useful shape, still very utilitarian. Not going to work for everything. So let's say, you know, you're thinking of skinning an animal or something. Obviously a Tanto blade is not the best for that use, but for most utility tasks, I find Tanto blades work really, really well. And as an EDC knife, that's mostly what we're doing is utility work with our knives. Okay, so I like the stonewash finish. It's not going to damage very easily. Not that you're going to really care. This is not exactly a collector's item. But a stonewash is nice because of the way that it doesn't really show a lot of wear very easily. All right, so there's the blade. It is a hollow grind. I don't think I mentioned that. And I will say this one thing about the particular blade shape. You see that this is fairly narrow, okay? And then you have this hollow grind, which is also fairly narrow. So that means you're going from you know, as close to zero as you can get at the sharpened edge up to the full thickness of the blade stock fairly quickly, okay? So it slices well, but when you're, you know, when I was cutting that cardboard, for example, or when you're cutting through a medium, you are gonna hang up a little bit. Let me give you an example of a hollow grind that's a little larger. So there is the Real Steel H6. Notice how it's still a hollow grind, but look at this distance. Okay, so it's a much more gradual hollow grind than the Prolite. And because of that, you get a little more sort of slicing ability out of that knife. All right, so that's my take on the blade. Certainly effective and useful for the average person for utility type tasks. I don't really have any complaints, especially, you know, at the price point. I would say, yeah, this is just a good budget steal. Now, let's move on to lockup and deployment. It is a triad lock, and it's a fairly positive one. So if I demonstrate here, I really have to push. Notice you've really got to get that to disappear all the way. So really, really deep engagement. But like many triad locks, it's quite stiff, right? And probably you're going to get some people complaining. Sometimes I'll use a knuckle or the side of my thumb like that. It's not that it's impossible to do with your thumb though. In terms of deployment speed, I'm going to go out of frame here for 1 second. Sorry. Well, I can flick this knife open with a little bit of wrist action, which is common for cold steels, right? The way the triad lock works is that lock, see how there's a spring pushing that lock, there's a spring pushing this lock bar down, so it's constantly putting pressure on the tang of that blade, which means you're not gonna get, you know, just this smooth, silky deployment like you might get with a liner lock or a frame lock, where there's less contact between the locking mechanism and the blade. There's pretty positive contact all the way through the range of motion of the blade on this knife and on any lockback, right? So deployment is certainly more than acceptable. I do think you can feel the price point, okay? I don't think it's just my imagination. If I work this lock and open the knife, it doesn't feel quite as smooth, quite as precise as, say, the Ultimate Hunter, okay, or even the Lawman. What other cold steel have I got here to show you? Or the Talwar, right? All of these slightly more expensive blades, they do feel a little smoother, and it feels like cold steel has tightened up the tolerances on a lot of these guys. And, you know, this is a budget offering, and you can sort of feel that. It could also involve the handle material as well. So, lockup and deployment, acceptable, not amazing. I'm not sitting here telling you how smooth and perfect this knife feels. It's acceptable, right? It feels good, but it's not this amazing, you know, it doesn't feel like a custom or something like that. And we wouldn't expect it to. Now, let's move on. We've talked about lockup and deployment. Very good. Let's move on now to the handle. Now, we've got this Grivery handle, and let me pull in a couple of other examples of handles for you. Okay, there's the G10 on the Tenacious. It is smoother than that, all right? Much smoother, of course, than the very heavy brick pattern G10 that Cold Steel does on like the Talwar, American Lawman, others. It's different than the Lawman. The Lawman is a finer pattern, but it's still extremely grippy, more grippy, I would say, than the Prolite. And I'm trying to, you know, for those of you who have some of these blades, I'm trying to give you a sense for how this feels. Maybe similar to the Ultimate Hunter, okay? And the Ultimate Hunter doesn't really have grippy textured G10. Don't ask me why I couldn't stop saying grippy. It doesn't really have textured G10. So this textured FRN, it's comfortable, and certainly it's grippy enough for anything that I would want to do. Now, of course, the jimping on the back isn't doing much. I can slide my thumb back and forth there pretty easily. However, the handle, because of that kind of cutout there, that choil at the front, does lock you in pretty well. Okay, it's a fairly positive grip, which is appreciated. And that the tactile, you know, sort of response that you get to that FRN is appreciated. So I'm glad they did that rather than just smooth, okay? It does certainly help a little. Now let's look at the pocket clip, and it is a very Emerson looking pocket clip, right? But nice to see that it's just a plain reversible clip. All the other knives I've shown you, yeah, so look on the Lawman, the Tawar is an extreme example, the Ultimate Hunter, all of these have that sort of angled clip, which if you've bought a cold steel knife before, you're familiar with that. They have to send you another clip, right? This clip is just kind of straight, extremely functional though, and in some ways I prefer this clip. It's simple and it works. It goes in and out of pocket easily. I think this pocket clip is a real win, and in fact, Cold Steel could probably learn something from this clip in terms of the way they do their other clips. So I think the pocket clip is very, very good. Lanyard hole there is quite small. There you go. So you maybe could fit bank line through it or something like that, but really, really tough to get any kind of paracord through. Let's see. Overall, okay, let me give you my impressions on this knife. I think this is a very good quality budget knife. It does allow you for an extremely reasonable price to get that strength and endurance of that triad lock, you know, something very trustworthy, very strong. Although I will say that there's going to be people out there who, because of the discomfort of it, are going to prefer something else, you know, maybe a liner lock, or even, you know, if you're looking for tough budget-friendly knives, there are many of them out there, but even something like that from CRKT with the frame lock, all of these are fairly easy to lock and unlock. They're fun to play with, and a lot of people are going to prefer that, okay? And I've had people complain and make comments on my videos, what's the story with the lock? It's so stiff. And it is. That's just part of the deal when you get a triad lock. It's very stiff, very positive lockup. And part of that is because they want to make it strong. And I understand. And I will also say that they do tend to break in over time. So as you use the knife over, you know, 6 months, a year or so, it will soften up. Now, it may not soften up to the point that you'd like. It may still be a little stiff and uncomfortable for you, but it's going to be okay. And frankly, when we judge a lock, I don't think it's entirely fair to judge a lock by how comfortable it is. The reality, what we need to care about most is how secure is it? How likely or unlikely is this knife to fold on me? And when it comes to the triad lock, it's extremely unlikely. So I'm going to call this knife a win. And I will say, you know, if you already have the Lawman, you know, if you're, now maybe you're a Cold Steel fan or you're a Cold Steel collector, then you're going to pick it up. But if you've got a Lawman, if you've got a few other Cold Steel offerings, maybe the Ultimate Hunter, or whatever else you may have, you know, I don't think you're gaining much by picking one of these up. If you're a Cold Steel fan and you want to collect everything, that may be a good reason for this. If you want something that you can use as a beater knife, that you can put in a survival kit, that you can use on those days where you're afraid to lose or break your knife, hey, I think those are all good reasons, and I think you've got a more than sufficient knife. If, on the other hand, you're watching this just because you're a person who's looking for a good folding knife and you want to know, is this worth the money? Absolutely, it's worth the money. It's as good as any other knife in that price category, and better than some. All right, so there you go. I hope you enjoyed the video, and we will talk to you soon.